Good morning, everyone. Grandpa Ron here again. Hope you're all having a great day. Today we're going to jump back into our very basic Bible study. We're calling this a slice of truth. It's our study in Exodus. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 21. If you remember, chapter 20 was a recounting of how God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. Remember the awesome visual aids and audio aids, just the awesome encounter with thunders and lightnings and smoke and fire and going up on the mountain. Very impressive. He didn't want the people of Israel, the children of Israel, to forget this. He wanted to make a lasting impression and a visual display of his power. But most people stop there when they think about the 10 Commandments. But in reality, the Bible has hundreds of ordinances and commands that God gave through Moses to the children of Israel. Hundreds. I think somebody's counted over 600. But generally our knowledge stops at the 10 Commandments. But chapter 21 is going to be a continuation of what God shared with Moses to give to the people. And we're going to take a look and see what some of these ordinances were. So let's jump in and take a peek. Exodus chapter 21, verse 1. Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. Now remember, when he started talking about the 10 Commandments, he referred to them as commandments. In verse 6, it says, to those who love me and keep my commandments, he shows loving kindness. So he referred to those first 10 as commandments. Here, referred to as ordinances. I don't know if there's anything distinguishing about that other than the first 10 were key, were vital to the understanding of the rest of them. But let's take a look at them. Verse 2. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. Slavery here was usually as a payment for a debt. Somebody owed money they couldn't pay. They would give themselves over or sell them to their person that they owed the debt to as a slave. And they'd basically be an employee. They would be working off that debt. And at the end of 6 years, they go free. So let's keep that in mind and keep going. Verse 3, if he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. So guy sells himself as a slave. He has a wife. When he is freed after 6 years, his wife will also go with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. So here's another situation. Guy sells himself as a slave. His master gives him a wife. He has children. At the end of 6 years, when he goes out free, his children and wife stay with the master. That seems kind of unfair, but let's read the next verse, verse 5. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God, then he shall bring him to the door or doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently. So the slave can say, no, I don't want to go. I love my wife, my children, my master, I want to stay. And then he'll become the permanent servant of the master. And they'll be able to say, stay. And when it says he shall bring him to God, that means the judges, they were actually considered to be God's representative, God's spokesman. So it was a legal issue. But yeah, the slave had that choice. Verse 7. And if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. You know, a male slave goes free. This may seem unfair, but think about it. A male slave goes free. He can go work for somebody else. Back then, a female slave goes free. If she went free, what is she to do? She's kind of left in the lurch in that society. So if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, at the end of 6 years, she's not going to go free. Seems harsh, but my wife and I, we actually know of a couple of ladies that are older that said when they were young, they were farmed out because their family was poor. That farmed out meant that they were given to another family to work, to earn money to support their family. In a sense, they were being sold as slaves. They were being farmed out. So this isn't just an ancient thing. This is something that's happened in the not too distant history in our own country. Verse 8, if she is displeasing in the eyes of her master who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to foreign people because of his unfairness to her. So a guy buys a slave girl, wants to take him for himself. He considers her displeasing. She can be redeemed. Her family or relatives can buy her back. But he can't sell her to a foreigner. Verse 9, and if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. So he has the slave girl. He designates her for his son. He is actually to treat her as a daughter. Verse 10, if he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. And if he will not do these three things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. So if he takes on another slave, he is not to diminish the support for this slave at all. In other words, they were obligated to take care of their slaves, feed and take care of their well-being. Verse 12, he who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. In other words, if it were not premeditated murder, but it was an accident, they got into a fight or something and he kills this person, then they would have what's called a sanctuary city. He could flee there. And the basic purpose of that was to get away from relatives who might want to wreak vengeance on this individual. But verse 14 covers premeditated murder. If, however, a man acts presumptuously toward his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar that he may die. In other words, there's no appeal. If he's found guilty of doing this, they have the death penalty. Verse 15, and he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Again, this issue of parents being held in high regard. They themselves are accountable to raise their children in a godly fashion and teach them about the Lord. And if a child strikes, the parents are to be put to death. Commentators are quick to point out that there's no historical record that this was ever done, but the law was on the books. I accidentally skipped over verse 16, which says, he who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. So kidnapping clearly carries the death penalty. Verse 17, and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So even cursing the parents, remember one of the commandments was you will honor your mother and father. Verse 18, And if men have a quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but remains in bed, if he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. He shall only pay for his loss of time, and he shall take care of him until he is completely healed. So let's say there's an argument and they get into a physical confrontation and one injures the other. The one that does the injuring is not to be punished if the person survives, but he has the responsibility of taking care of that person until he is healed up, and he is to pay for whatever lost wages or time he had because he couldn't work. So there's this sense of personal responsibility in all of these ordinances. Verse 20, and if a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. And I'm assuming the punishment would be related to some of the punishments we've already read about, but let's go on because it gets a little more complicated here. Verse 21, if, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. So if the person survives, there's this responsibility to take care of them, but there's not going to be the punishment as if it were premeditated murder. Verse 22, and if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. So again, this is looked at as an accidental thing, not premeditated murder, but there's personal responsibility that exists. Verse 23, but if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And a lot of people consider this very brutal and harsh. Some countries still administer these types of punishment. But there's another way to look at this as well. If we go way back to when we were studying in Genesis, if we look at Genesis 4:23, it talks about Lamech. And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. And it goes on. But he actually killed these two people, the boy for just hitting him, and he killed a man because he wounded him. So that wasn't an uncommon situation. People taking vengeance beyond the damage that they experienced. So really what God is saying here is you're not going to go any further. You're going to be fair in this. If someone injures you and damages your eye, you're not to kill them. If someone damages your foot or your arm, you're not to kill them. But their penalty can't go beyond eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, so forth. So this is actually putting limits on the nature of the punishment. So rather than viewing this as brutal, it could be viewed as very kind and gracious of the Lord, trying to get people to realize that they can't go overboard. Life is precious, and to kill someone because they injured you is not acceptable. So let's move on. Verse 26, and if a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. And if he knocks out a tooth of his male or female slave, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth. Again, this personal responsibility, a clear signal that if you are mistreating your slaves, you're damaging them, you're going to lose them. Verse 28. And if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. So here's this personal responsibility. You can't just be careless and forget about other people. You have got to take care of their safety, of the people around you, in having these flocks and herds and bulls and goats and all this stuff. Verse 30. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. So the bull gores somebody, he's been warned. The bull gores somebody else, it kills him. He could be allowed to buy his life back if it was something that was agreeable to the victim's relatives or whatever. Verse 31, whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So if the ox kills a slave, it should be treated like if it killed anybody else. You're going to have to stone that ox and kill it, but you're also going to have to pay the owner of the slave. Verse 33. I apologize. I'm having to clear my throat a lot here, so you're going to see the tape jumping. Don't know what that's all about, but bear with me, please. And if a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his. So if the animal falls into an uncovered pit, the owner of the pit's going to have to pay for that animal, but he does get to keep the animal. Verse 35, and if one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide its price equally, and also they shall divide the dead ox. So if their animals get in a conflict and one gets killed, they're going to sell both of them and split the money. Verse 36, or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his. His ox gores another man's ox, and he's already been warned previously. He's going to have to pay for that other man's ox. We're going to stop there, but the next chapter goes into more laws concerning theft and dishonesty and things like that. But as you can see, God didn't just stop at the 10 Commandments and regarding his relationship to men and their relationship to him, and the basic principles of relationship man to man. But he's giving specifics here. Remember that Moses was sitting at in the camp and adjudicating cases day after day, hour after hour. And his brother-in-law says, that's not very smart. You need to appoint judges, and you need to let them handle the minor stuff, and the big stuff they can bring to you. You pick good men. And remember, Moses picked judges. But God just didn't leave them in the lurch. He's giving them actual ordinances, rules that they can use, and guidance they can follow, and meting out judgments and penalties and ways they can adjudicate these different cases. I hope this has been meaningful to you and that you have enjoyed going through this chapter 21. Hope you'll watch the next one. In the meantime, God bless. See you later. Bye.